In this episode, I am joined by Ishtar, an independent meditation teacher, mystic, and spiritual guide. Ishtar shares his unusual childhood, including near-constant encounters with ghosts, early spiritual experiences, astral journeys, and precognitive dreams. Ishtar details his life of spiritual seeking, years of intensive meditation practice, encounters with cult groups, dark nights of the soul, and more. Ishtar also recounts the car crash that both killed his mother and plunged Ishtar at 13 years old into a near-death experience that would change his life forever. So without further ado, Ishtar. Well, Ishtar, thank you for the interview.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Let's start in your childhood. Yeah. Can you give a sense of the context of your upbringing, your childhood in Wisconsin?
Yes, a big spectrum from extremely normal American Midwestern upbringing with sort of all the quotidian interests that entails Green Bay Packers, bratwurst, baseball, these cornfields and all that sort of stuff, to lots of high strangeness. And I was raised in mostly, I think my family bordered on their religion being scientism. So, which I'm actually glad for, because I was also, in my town, I felt surrounded by a lot of highly credulous evangelical types who often tended to be on the meaner side. And so very early on I kind of associated a reverence for science and scientific method with kindness that later I found it wasn't necessarily always there. But so that was a good solid footing, I have to say, and I credit my parents a lot because they actually taught me how to argue, how to string premises together, put a conclusion on, and examine those things really before they taught me manners. And so which backfired when they tried to teach me table manners, and I thought, well, that seems rather arbitrary, doesn't it? So that was there. But at the other side, I think there was this sort of magical psychical streak in my family, both sides, that had sort of really been under the ground in most people, and it really, I think, including my sister, came up in the two of us, and so very early on, I think I had my first ghost experience, for instance, before I could walk and before I could talk, because I remember both of those firsts, and I was just in the crib before the sun came up, middle of the night or early, wee early hours of the morning, and a lady walked into my room, and I wasn't frightened at all. I don't think I'd learned the term ghost or anything like that at that point. She had the same curly hair as my alive grandmother, and I was used to having people sleep in the bed across from my crib, so it wasn't an unusual thing to see someone in the room with me. And she had this blue nightgown on and a white lace collar of a certain kind, and she walked past my crib. She never turned her head to look at me, but I felt her tuning into me, and this feeling was entirely benevolent, benevolent interest, and so okay. And then I kept watching her, and she just kept walking by, and then she walked out the back wall of my bedroom, which was very strange. And so I was thinking, well, I'd like to do that someday. And years later, I was looking through a family picture album, and we were scrolling through, and there she was. And then I was like, well, who's that? And my mom explained to me that was my great grandmother who died a year before I was born, and that probably we'd have a lot in common. So that was nice. And turns out we did have a lot in common, because she was one of the, in the previous, I suppose, 2 generations back, she was one of the mystics in the family, one of the very few. So I kind of picked up on that. So there was that. I had a lot of nighttime visitors after that, and daytime visitors, and all of that sort of stuff. So that was certainly part of life. That stressed me out quite a bit. That was even today. I'm kind of realizing how how unnerving it was. I'll feel it sort of releasing in the musculature of my body sometimes, and have sort of flash memories of being 3 and having somebody wake me up, stuff like that. And I responded to it, I think, by watching the film Ghostbusters every day for a year. And I looking back, I realized I was using that movie as a way to make myself comfortable with the phenomena that I was experiencing. Because if Bill Murray can be comedic with this stuff, I could too, or I could handle it. I was also at the time very interested in Sherlock Holmes, especially the Jeremy Brett, Granada rendition, and he was kind of my hero. And so I had the desire to be sort of a Sherlock Holmes, but with also psychic abilities. I thought that would be great if I could do that. So I actually turned my room as best as I could on no budget, into what looked like to me a Victorian detective's consulting office, and I had an old costume Sherlock Holmes hat and coat that somehow fit me. And when a spirit would come in, I was dealing with it by putting the hat on, having them sit across from me, and listening to their problems like Jeremy Brett would. And I would do this ritual, self-coping, because at the time I also thought, this must be your imagination too. But even if I thought that, it didn't stop it from happening. And so I would close my eyes, and I would go into this, I would just go behind myself, behind my body, and I would find myself going into this big, vast space. And somehow I had this instinct to sort of gently project it out in front of me, in the space between me and my visitor. And then after a few seconds, when I would sort of feel something, I would open my eyes and they'd be gone. And the room would feel cleansed, and I would feel good about the space again. And I don't know how many times I did this. I mean, this was maybe 1, 2, 3 times a day for a while as a kid. As I got older, that sort of stuff started to fade a bit, which I was truly glad for, because it was all a bit much. And then it was about age 6 or 7. Another aspect of childhood was that, when I was remembering things I shouldn't be about childhood, and I didn't know that I wasn't supposed to be able to form memories until about 2.5, until I was 18 and in a AP psychology course. And a lot of before 2.5 was there. And I think that was somewhat connected to also the sense that when I was a kid, even though I had a sense of my mother and my father and my sister and objects as being different and distinct from me, there was also this sense that they weren't. And I remember learning language, for instance, and learning pronouns was a whole lot of fun. I must have been obnoxious, like most toddlers are when they're learning words. Me, you, this, that, just running around the house doing that. And I remember what I would say, that's a shelf, but I'd also say the shelf is also me. That's me. And my mother didn't, I was glad that she didn't repress this or correct me too harshly. I think she was actually interested in it in some way, what's going on with this kid. And so language didn't really break that sense up for me. And so it was about age 6 or 7, I was in a kindergarten parent-teacher conference, which sounds like a bizarre thing to have a parent-teacher conference in kindergarten. But I was at one with my mother, and the teacher told my mother he's got a great personality, and I hadn't encountered that word yet. So I asked my mother, what's a personality? And then she went on to describe, and somehow a light bulb went up in my head at that moment, because a question that I'd had by that time was, why do the adults say things that they're not feeling? And why do they not say exactly what they're feeling? And why is there this dissonance between what I felt was going on inside them and what they were putting out to the world? It confused me to no end, this thing. And that was sort of the biggest question in my observation of people, because things with me tended to just kind of come out without any filter. There didn't seem to be that. And then when she said what the personality was, I thought, oh, that's it. It's a filtering device, where inputs come in and you have some kind of preset things, and then something else goes out. And I thought, I got to have me one of those, because I felt really kind of I felt a little bit alien truth be told. Even though I felt comfortable with my mother and my father and my sister and people in my family, I still felt a bit alien from even them and the greater world. I thought, this will make me less alien. And so I was having a great time every morning when I was a baby of the family. With babies, the parents like to baby you longer because I was going to be the last one. There's no one coming after me. And so at age 6, I was still getting dressed by my mom, for instance. So I think my sister, the older one, said, screw that earlier. And so each morning we'd get dressed. I would also tell my mother, today, I like this and I dislike this, whereas yesterday I disliked that and like this. I'm afraid of these things because this thing happened to me, which it didn't. And so I was basically creating creating characters. And I would stick to those characters the entire day so that I could have a personality. And at some point, I think a natural, sort of a more native, endemic personality, something formed, and I started to really suffer in first grade. And I lost that connection that I really didn't know I solidly had. I lost that connection to presence, to silence, to this sort of field that was kind of everywhere when I was 4 or 5. And so, that set up school, and like most kids developing their ego, I really went for it over the next few years. And so I did well at school. I didn't do so well socially, but until I learned how to be more manipulative, like most people. I told my sister one day, Sis, I figured it out. I know how people won't bother me so much. I'll just pretend to be somebody else that these people like, and then I won't have problems, and I can have some peace. And she was very quickly said, don't do that. That you're going to forget who you are. And I said, no, I've got it covered. Then about a year later, when I was asking my parents for advice for something, they said, just be yourself. And that just drove me mad, because I was like, well, which one? I said, that's awful advice. What's wrong with you? And I ran up to my sister's room and I said, hey, sis, I got to say you were right. That was a bad strategy, and I don't know, I'm in a hole I don't know how to get out of. And I kind of stayed in that hole until about 13. And even though I was kind of doing the ego development thing, I mean, the mystical stuff was still there, but it was well on the back burner. That was not the forefront of life at all. It was basketball, baseball, academics, being liked, then my hobby horse pet interest outside of school. And then I hit 13, and I was actually, I think that was a year that I think I'd finally figured out, to my estimation, how to be a good faker. That I was actually really good at it. And that was the perfect time, actually, for that to go down. Sorry, I got a little bit emotional. I was remembering my mother. It was the second to last day of school. I think it was my 6th grade year. And those were usually great days because, summer vacation is coming. And for me, summer vacation was always the time that I could do internal exploration and sort of be free of most of the social stressors that inhabited my life. So I was very excited for it. I went and played baseball for the first time, which was something I loved doing. But I got hit by a pitch, and it turns out I broke my arm doing that. So after coming home from getting it x-rayed, for me, I was mopey, and I was upset about not being able to play the baseball season. And I was talking with my mother before going to bed, like I usually did. And then it just kind of flew out of my mouth, "Are you going to die soon?" Which was really bizarre. And I was never really worried about her health-wise. She seemed much healthier than my dad, who would be the one I tended to worry about. And it kind of struck me, and it kind of caught her, which was strange, because she's a very formidable person, impervious to a lot of that sort of thing. And then she calmed down. She said, "No, I'll be around for as long as you need me." I said, "Okay." I don't know why that came through me. And I went to bed, and then I woke up the next morning as if I was running into my body from somewhere else. And I actually literally springed out gasping to a vertical position, just at the time that my mother and my father were walking outside my bedroom door. And I was distraught because I was saying, there's something I have to tell you. And I was about to say what I had to tell them, and I forgot. And so that's, I was like, I don't know what it is. I was so upset they had to come into my room and basically calm me down for like 3 to 5 minutes. And then when I was all right, they left on their morning walk. That was the last time I saw them together as a parental unit, as a married couple. And I went to school, came back. We dropped my older sister off at her new job, which was sort of outside of town. And as we were pulling out of the parking lot of that place, across one of those 4-lane divided highways, we passed one car very safely, but apparently there was another car that was masked behind it that had just started to put pedal to metal. And I was looking to say something to my mom, and there was a giant gray Lincoln town car sort of car, like right outside her door. And so I was absolutely certain that this was the end of this life. For both of us, I didn't think we were coming out of this. And instead of getting, instead of tightening up, which is what I would expect myself to do in that situation, a strange calm came over me. I had time for a second thought besides shit, which was the first one, and the second one was, boy, I thought this one was going to go more than 13 years, and it was not from my usual sort of narrator brain behind the head space. It was from this much sort of deeper space that I'd encountered even after 7, but not that frequently. And I thought, okay, and immediately after I thought that, I started to see the entire life played backwards, which was actually cool for me. It was something I always wondered about. And I was skeptical of it, actually. I thought, that can't really be true. It can't be every single moment of life. Come on, And that was, I didn't see how that was possible, but there it was. And in this case, it was even better and more interesting because I was sort of joined by, I could say, an aspect of consciousness that was completely objective. That when I had contact with it before in my life, I often sort of bristled at its advice. Usually it would come and say, look, that's a bad idea. You might not want to do that. I'd say, shut up, I'm going to go do, and then it would be a bad idea. And so it was kind of like Virgil in the Divine Comedy. It was sort of it felt like a psychopomp, but it also felt like me in a sense. And we were going through my whole life, and pros and cons, and everywhere where I'd put on a mask, or I'd acted out of fear, where there was some kind of pretense, we saw those points. We looked at them and said, oh yeah, see, you didn't need to do that. And part of the seeing of it was also this kind of a release, which was palpable physically. And so it kind of felt like I was just having something stripped off of me that I didn't even know I was wearing. And that was wild. So by the end of the session, I basically felt like everything was made out of love. Those were even the words that came to my non-metaphysically inclined 13-year-old brain. Was this sense of, oh my God, it was love the whole time, all of it, every single interaction. One of the interactions I remember still vividly to this day. We were looking at me losing a fight, against a few people, and part of that, it was very humiliating and painful at the time on the playground, and having my face thrown into the chain-linked fence, and from going through it, there was a sense of, oh my God, I was all of them. I was the fence too, and I was the tree that was looking on, and I was the sky above it, and I was the playground equipment, and there was also an aspect of my consciousness or something that I could hear kind of laughing and mirthfully saying like, this is great, ha ha ha, this is perfect, we need this kind of pain, and I was like, okay, and so there were also positives that I would never have thought were positive, that I just didn't have as memories actively, like me and this guide zoomed in on, I think I must have been in 3rd grade. It was a rainy day. I was outside for recess, and I was looking at the rain just slowly trickling into this puddle in front of me on the blacktop. And something in that moment, I was looking at the drops, and I fell into just silence and nothingness and everythingness. And the guide said, that was what you're here for. That's it, right there. That was not on the agenda. And so that was over. I was sitting there in the car. We hadn't even been hit yet, which must have been, I don't know how long that could have lasted in real time, a second, something like that. And it was the most alive I'd ever been to that point. Just the scene, looking at the dashboard of the car, looking at the clouds in the sky, looking at the driver who didn't even notice that he was about to hit us in his car, my mother's shoulder, and then, boom. And I'm amazed I didn't have a head injury, because I remember being whipped over to my right and my head running into the glass of the car door and being knocked out by that. And I came to with a seatbelt seatbelt signal going off, and people outside running their skill saws to try to cut open the car, and being quickly taken out. Well, quickly but well. I noted, like, these people know how to handle a human body, as the EMTs were taking me out, putting me on a gurney, and we're taken to an ambulance. Ironically, we're going to the same hospital we were actually heading to. We were going to put a cast on my arm, and so we were headed to the hospital. And my mother called my name out. I was quite concussed, so I really didn't know many details of my life, except that's my mother over there. And away she called my name twice. I answered twice. The first time she didn't register. The second time I knew she registered, because her breathing completely changed and went from sort of a pained, labored breath to completely relaxed. And I had that thing that people do in these situations, where I was both in, sort of flat with my head held down, looking up at the EMT trying to answer questions. And at the same time, I was looking down from the top of the ambulance. And when she spoke, it was not registered as somebody outside of myself speaking to me. I had the sense, at least, of feeling as if we were the same consciousness. And when I replied the second time, I kind of felt a weird whoosh. That's the best word I can use for it. I felt a whoosh out of this joined consciousness at the top of the ambulance, and I didn't have a sense that somehow meant that I wasn't going to be able to talk to my mom again. I wasn't thinking either. I wasn't thinking much of anything in the ambulance. And then the next stop, we're in the hospital. I find myself looking over the best that I can to the curtained area where they're trying to save my mom's life. And then I find out, my sister finds out at the same time, that she's not going to make it, that she's gone. And that was just grief for the next few days. Just, everything merged into the next moment. And so it took about a week until I think I was out of that initial shock. And then more interesting stuff sort of started to happen. At the same time that I didn't necessarily know if I believed in a God at the time or not, but if I was thinking in my head, I was very angry. I was thinking, if there is a God, of that kind, I'm pissed off. Why the hell would you, why would you take a good person like my mother, at age 45? Why you let these other people live and take her? Why you take my mom? Really pissed off. So I was in the garage. I'd be punching the walls and angry. But at the same time that I was doing all that, there was this very strange silence that was there all the time. And it felt as if, instead of just being contained to my head, I was falling back into endlessness from my head, from my heart, from my body. And so I figured this was shock. It seemed like shock to me. And so I thought, okay, I like this shock. This is good stuff. I wish I'd known about this sooner. I would have done something to get myself here. Because it was the darndest thing. I was feeling things fully, more fully than I had before. The emotions would just run through with no no stoppage or editing. And at the same time, I felt like I was sitting in some kind of quiet cave behind a swiftly running waterfall. And then I started to play with that space because I was very interested in this. It was just, I couldn't shake it. There was nothing I could do to have it go. First, I would try to do that, try to run away. I'd try to tell lies or contort myself, and I would start laughing because it was impossible. And then I would go into it, and there would be all this bliss. And that was bizarre to me because I was feeling the sadness I was feeling crushed and missing my mother. And yet there was this bliss or this joy. What the hell is that? How can these two things be together was a question. But I was more of a pragmatist, so I was just kind of going with it. Okay, let's see what this is about. There was one time that I was about to ask my dad, hey, Dad, do you feel this bliss? And I stopped. Something in me answered the question before it was done. It's absolutely he doesn't. It's no point in asking. Keep this shit to yourself, basically. Don't let the adults muddy the experiences you're having. They won't understand. So I kept, I kept it all to myself, not even telling. I don't even think I told my best friends much of what was going on. A few of them. And so I kind of stayed in that space for about 2 to 3 months. And it was weird. I was being a teenager, and at the same time I had this whole other dimension going on for that time. Some person noticed a change, some kind of change in the regular station. They asked me, what happened to have this happen? Well, how could I have this? I think they must have been also 13 or 14, which is a strange conversation for Midwestern kids to have. And I just told them, well, I think you should get yourself into a car accident or something similar and almost die, but not. And then we just laughed because that's the worst advice, what one could give. And so, I had no idea. And then I went back to school, and for whatever reason, all that bliss, that silence, all of those sorts of elements just faded. And I was, at the same time, I was recommitting to try to be the same person that I was before. Both for my own desire and also because I felt like I owed it to my mother and my family and everybody who'd invested any kind of effort in me up to that point. And I thought, okay, let's do this thing again. Let's go be this person who I was, 3-4 months ago. And I really gave a go that year in doing that. It was difficult. I would wake up almost every day. I would be crying for about an hour. First period of school was just lost. I'd have to go to the bathroom and cry often. I would wake up, because I thought I was also trying to affect time. Before I went to bed every night, I would focus all of my energy and try to say, I'm going to wake up. I hadn't even seen Somewhere in Time yet with Christopher Reeve, but I was trying to do that thing. I was I'm going to wake up. It's June 5th, 1997. And for a few seconds each morning, and I believed it. I believed I'd done it. And then the fact that I had not done it, in fact, would just come crashing in and I would be devastated. So that was a hard year. I went through it. The next summer came, another time for transformation. And what was on the agenda now was how to get back to that strange place I was last summer. How could we get back there? And even though I'd been exposed to different sorts of mystical traditions, and that had always been kind of an interest, I didn't connect it at all to what I had been experiencing. I was fascinated with Tibetan Buddhists, for instance, from age 6. I would love reading through Time Life books and looking at their pictures, but I didn't see that their world and my little 13-year-old Wisconsin white boy world could be merged at all or have anything to do with each other. So I wasn't searching there. Instead, I was jumping out of golf carts and jumping from heights and trying to do things that would just scare the crap out of me so that I could get myself into that space again. And at one point, I jumped out of a moving car, and that I almost broke an arm. I landed on it. I didn't roll for some reason. I don't know why. And then at that point, I thought, this is not a good strategy, so I just stopped that. And at some point I walked into a metaphysical bookstore with my sister, And I'd never had an interest to go into one because I'd look at the windows and I saw wind chimes and incense, and I wasn't necessarily at the time into those sorts of things. But I was a very good little brother. So I went with her, and I went in the back, and there was a book on Himalayan yogis. Just picked up at random and opened it. I wish it would have been Autobiography of a Yogi. That would have been good to catch it then. But I picked it up, and I started reading about descriptions of their experiences, and all the hairs on my body went up. And just the shivers going up my body. It's like, what the hell? This was basically sounding like quite a bit like what I'd been going through. So at that point, the spiritual seeker, more or less, was born. And I basically stayed in that bookstore for the better part of anytime I had free time, the better part of the next 2 years. I'd get in there anytime I could. I would read books, all sorts of them. I'd be very careful not to damage them. I didn't have much money of my own. I kind of had a tacit agreement, so tacit that there was no agreement with the owner. And so I would buy like an amulet. I'd get money together to buy an amulet like once a month, as long as I didn't hurt anything. And at that same time, I was blessed also to have these local psychics, to be in presence with these local psychics. One was a TM meditator, or TM teacher, I should say, a long time. Another one was our local Qigong teacher. Another was a man who claimed to be a walk-in, which was a new thing for me. And there were more, but these were the three main ones that I was kind of getting some guidance from. And I was drawn to them because I felt in them that same presence. When I'd be around them, I would feel that space that I had been in. And it would like a tuning fork. So I was like, okay, these they know. I've got to see what I can do. And I was glad for that. I think I was still, in my mind, a part-time spiritual seeker, because I was still trying to find a way to be, a normal person. When I was young, I wanted to be a politician, actually for maybe generally good motives. I wanted to help people and be a public servant. And I was like, I'm willing to take a bullet. I'll take one, because that's what's going to happen if you're a effective and good politician. And I was like Lincoln, let's do it. But after the NDE, that I didn't want that anymore, and that was rough. So I was trying to find some niche in the world that I could take up, and I thought, okay, the arts. I never thought of myself as an artist, but let's be a session drummer and or an actor, and try both of those careers out. So that was what was on my mind at the time, not to be any kind of a mystic. And I remember going out on a trip to visit my sister at her East Coast college, Hampshire College in Northampton, Massachusetts. And I loved my big sister. She was taught me so much in life. And we were hanging out, had a wonderful week. And we saw this sort of gypsy palm reader in a Victorian house in Northampton, and I think $5 readings. And we're like, $10 for the both of us, good deal, we can do that, So we went up there, and obviously not like a proper gypsy, more what Americans think a gypsy should look like, was typically like a Ukrainian lady with lace on her head, or something like that. And so we went in there and gave our money to the son, who was sort of another stereotype. And we weren't expecting any real psychic abilities. We were just there for fun. And so I decided to not let her cold read me, so I'd tell her nothing about what I wanted to do. And I, instead of looking like a creative type, I thought, think accountant. And so so I gave her my hand. And she said, the first thing she said, which didn't throw me off of my anti-cold reading thing, was, "You're absolutely not going to be actor or musician." And I still was keeping, a straight face, and I'm like, okay, and then she just said it again, as if you could tell I was arguing. She's like, "Nope." Then I decided, okay, I'm going to break this anti-cold reading, just join and have some fun here. And so I was like, well, as a matter of fact, that's exactly what I want to do, and I'm going to do it. I'm actually well positioned to do it. You'll see, I'm a hard worker, I can make it happen. And then she just really kept saying, no matter how hard you try, not going to happen. And I was like, okay, well, if that's not what I'm going to do, what do you think I'm going to do? What is my poem telling you? And then I think she had like a Sybil Trelawney from Harry Potter moment. She went into some space, and when she started talking, she didn't seem to be believing the words she was saying, or they were strange to her. It was I don't know if she was acting or if that was natural or what, but the word she told me was, in fact, you're going to travel the world teaching the true mystical teachings of Christ. At which point, I didn't laugh because she was an old lady and I want to be polite, to her. But I saw like a Orthodox icon on the back wall out of my peripheral vision. I said, "Oh, this is what she's trying to do. She's trying to get me to be part of her religion in some way." So as politely as I could, with a little bit of guffawing, I have to say, I was kind of like, well, we're just going to have to agree to disagree on that one. I don't have a religious bone in my body, even though she did say the word mystical, which, wouldn't go with the, orthodoxy usually. I was still sort of, triggered at that. 6 years later, I think she may have had the last laugh on me. It was that was age 15, 14 or 15 at that time, 1999. And so I went through high school, had I think a lovely time of it, except for the first 2 years in which there was lots of depression. And by junior year, I was kind of, I need to let this mad monk out of me. That's what I was basically calling this thing inside me. Not really a thing, but this constellation of impulses which were not at all supported, I felt, by my family or my community or even by my first 13 years of life. This sense that I needed to, do I go be a priest? Do I run away to the Himalayas? What do I do with this? I was keeping a lid on it for sure, because I thought if I let this stuff come out, it's just gonna destroy everything that I'm trying to work for. There's going to be no turning back. And at some point, I just kind of got sick of repressing it. It's like, I think maybe that's me down there, or maybe that's a truer life in there. So like, all right, fuck it. It's like we have to be true. We can't mouth these words, of truth. It's either be true or not. So like, okay, let it out. And then I started like, okay, I'm going to meditate 6 hours a day. And all right, we're going to have to do cold showers at 3 a.m. and we're going to do concentration meditations. We're going to count from 1 to 10 without letting our mind go on anything else. And if I think of something else at 5, I have to start over again at 1. And I put myself through this, and it was awful in parts, because I also was going in thinking like, you have to be good at this. You better be. And I was awful at it. So it's like, oh God. And we were doing that, and we decided, well, we're going to have to do that in our last year of high school. And so we're going to have to figure out a way to do as little homework as possible, but keep the grades going if we can. And meditation comes first, and studies come second. So in the time before, should we take a break right here? Yeah. Okay. Oh yeah, sort of in teen monk period. That was a weird period. Yeah.
Well, seeing as we've had an interjection, what do you think? To what do you owe this proclivity for the psychic and the mystic and the strange?
So I was, even at 6 or so, age 6. I have to cop out to basically being a dyed-in-the-wool reincarnation believer. As much as I tried to be objective about it, and I was pretty sure. And I even caught the Stevenson stuff, or at least a translated version for an 8-year-old's mind to understand. I even caught that stuff early, and around age 8 or 9, and researched as many cases that I felt were strong ones as I could, to the extent. And so I did have a sense that this wasn't my first rodeo with this sort of thing. That would be the only, that was the strongest sort of idea I had at the time. Probably, especially with the later on, like at 18 when I'm in psych class, which I loved, and learning about memory and stuff like that, and I'm breaking the rules. And at the same time, I had Autobiography of a Yogi, along for the ride my last year of high school. I was thinking, I think I agree with Yogananda. I think that this early memory is, the early memories and all these things are tied to, meditating like my hair was on fire for some period of time before this birth or something like that. So I also, as a teenager, started having what I could have called other lifetime memories, but I was actually fairly good, mostly about keeping my feet on the ground and not sort of framing things prematurely, but I kept having this sense of being somehow connected to the Theosophical Society in the 19th century. I would see pictures of various members, and I would have all the hair stand up in my body and things going, and I would have myself sort of flashed into garden parties. The scene would change in front of me, and there I'd be, and like, what? And then back in Lake Geneva. And I was like, okay, all right, something's going on here. This is interesting. And I would read about different characters in history, and some I would have no resonance with at all, but other names, even without context, I would come across a name, and the same thing would happen. Anytime, I'm not sure if this is true or not, but I had the tendency to associate, if I would get a bolt of energy that would come up my left leg and shoot up my spine and up my crown as a reaction to these things, I started to have a very positive connotation with whatever it was I was encountering. So that was basically what I thought was going on. I also, as a kid, had in my bedroom sometimes would change, and I remembered this up until about age 8. It would go on where I'd be just in my normal bedroom with its funky yellow walls that I hated and the weird blue curtains, and all of a sudden that would disappear, and I would find myself with a much nicer paint color, smaller windows with sort of red paint around them, and I would look out one and I would see mountains, and then that would go, and this was when I was awake, so it was just kind of like a waking dream sort of situation, and I had this profound nostalgia for snow-peaked mountains, and I almost ran away a few times. Not that I was that dissatisfied with my family or life in Lake Geneva. I actually had mainly a very good time, but there was such a pull to get to Snow Peak. I wasn't thinking it through. Like, that's why I didn't go, because I thought it through. I was like, what am I going to do when I get there? Maybe it's not the same as it was. So there was some kind of longing for that, often inchoate. At one point when I was trying to decide to go to school, I kind of asked, well, where should I go to college? Because I wasn't even quite feeling it, which was weird, because my whole early life was geared towards getting into the best academic program I possibly could. And it wasn't there. I was like, well, I need to go somewhere where I can get enlightened and get a uni degree, and it should be in Switzerland. And so I started searching online for things like that in Switzerland. I didn't really find anything. There are a lot of things like that going on. So mainly the reincarnation stuff, but I never had any memories where I had a sense, I'm this or that person. And anytime sometimes I would be in a scene and I would inquire like, oh, who am I here? And some omniscient narrator voice would say, access denied. And I was like, oh God, okay. I said, all right, that's fine. We don't need to know these things. I went to a $5, for me anyways, because I was a kid, Connect with Your Spirit Guide course in the basement of the metaphysical store. And I wasn't expecting anything from this. And I did the exercise, they told me, but something different happened. I ended up shooting out the top of my head up this big tube, and then I went up through a floor, and there were these people who almost was a little bit Philip K. Dicky. They kind of had charts of my life up and sort of possible timelines, and they seemed to know what they were doing, and I was hearing them talk about me, and then they all looked and saw me and said like, oh, good job. Well, and they basically told me through thought of, it's really great that you were able to do that, but you don't do that again, and you have everything you need to know down in your earth life. You don't need any information from us or anyone. You're fine. Figure it out with the resources that you have. down there. So I was like, all right, and went down. So that was another weird teen experience. I asked my friend Austin who I was in a past life. He had the same thing. He was a very psychic man, so I thought he'll know. He might know something. And he was again saying like, yeah, I'm not allowed to tell you, and they won't even show me the stuff. So that was. That was actually a point of frustration at the time, because I was really kind of wanting to know that sort of stuff from, I think, an egotistical point of view. I really wanted to feel better about myself, and if I could have been some illustrious person of some kind in another life, I thought, oh, that'll be great, and I think that was a big part of why none of that was going on.
Are you at that time, were your psychic abilities limited to the dead?
No, they weren't. Yeah, and thankfully other stuff started to happen, because I honestly was not wanting to be a medium or anything close. That was just not my preference. So stuff started to happen. I would see things, and usually I didn't necessarily believe it. I just figured I had a good imagination a lot of the time, and I didn't want to be like one of those hyper-credulous people. But it was nice that I had some people around me who could validate things. So, for instance, this friend Austin of mine would do that. For instance, I had this thing through childhood where when I would go to bed, some nights I would find myself shooting out the top of my head, and I would find myself flying above the tree in the back of the house, and through the sky. And I never really thought anything of that, because that's all something one could imagine. And I would often go to these, what to me looked like floating cities. And sometimes I would remember these encounters. Usually, I don't think I did. I would black out before I would get there. But sometimes I would go there, there'd be other people there, and we would be learning things. And sometimes, there was one time that I found myself, actually, I'm the teacher, and I'm telling people about a subject I had zero interest of in my waking life. I was talking about the spiritualized botany of the 21st century, and just going on about this stuff. And so I woke up with the word. I woke up in my body right away from that. I was like, botany, and so I kind of thought nothing of it too. I thought it was just a very cool dream, until it was like a day or two later. I don't remember which, but I was at my friend Austin's house, and without me saying anything about any of that aspect of my life or those experiences, he said, "Saw you on the ship last night." And I said, what do you mean by that? The one that's floating above the lake, which was where the place was that I was at. I wouldn't have called it a ship. He called it that. I called it a city. And I said, oh yeah? I still wanted to kind of get a little bit more out, just to extend the probability of such a thing. And he said, yeah, you were talking about, you're giving a really interesting talk about botany, though I don't really remember much of it. And then when he said botany, I was like, oh, good Lord, that's how probable is that? And I was like, okay, maybe these places I've been going throughout life, have some sort of objective reality to them. So there was that. Another one was, I was, in the summer I loved swimming at the lake. There was a really nice beach in my town, and I would swim between the piers and sometimes sit out at the end of a pier and look out. Well, one day when I came out of the water, I saw this massively wide, and I didn't see an end to it, and endlessly tall shaft of light coming out of the other end of the lake. And I fixed my eyes, closed them, opened them again. I was seeing it again. And then I looked around, is anybody else seeing this? It didn't seem to be the case. Even people who were looking in this direction didn't seem to be awed by this sight. So I was like, okay, this is interesting. It's still there. It stayed with me for about 5 to 10 minutes when I saw this thing before it kind of disappeared. And I went on with my day. And so then the next day I was talking to another friend by the name of Walter Matthew Brown, who was this great Qigong teacher and local psychic. And he just looked at me also, and he stopped and he said, I can't do his impersonation, he was so laid back. He's like, oh, I can tell you've seen the shaft of light too. And I was like, what? What do you mean? Yeah, the one in the lake. So it's very similar to my experience with Austin, and that would be the only way I could accept those things if I said nothing, to give context. And then, I just kind of went on. And so I was seeing stuff like that. And sometimes, I had a lot of had a lot of daydreams most of my life. And so in those daydreams, I would have conversations with people that I hadn't met yet, and that was another feature. I would be finding myself having this conversation a week or 2 weeks later. Of course, with those, I was always skeptical of those because it's like, I'm probably just creating a false memory of something that was too gooey for me to be sure of. So those just piled, and I kind of had to have these experiences with Austin and Walter Matthew Brown to be, more sure that at least maybe some of these are objectively happening. Another time I was 17, I was walking around in the Walmart. At that point, I was actually more settled with, I'll go to some kind of liberal arts college and I'll just meditate 2 hours a day. It'll be great. I'll take care of both bases. That seems very practical and a good choice. And that's where I was. So I didn't have any big question in my head. And but I was curious, well, where am I going to go? Where am I going to be a year from now? And so it just kind of came to me to ask the universe, which is in the middle of the Walmart, hey, where am I going to be in about a year from now? And I did, and to my surprise, like a big screen appeared in front of me, and there was a narrator who sounded like a game show host, which I felt was very fitting, for whatever reason, and because he was like, as a matter of fact, like that, you're going to be working in a mostly vegetarian cafe with a bunch of monks, many of whom wear all white clothing. They're going to train you as the dishwasher, and then you'll do every job and eventually be trained to be a chef. And I had a very clear picture of what like the inside of the cafe looked like from the perspective of the kitchen. And I was looking at a ticket window. There was a kind of a bar outside, like for coffee and juices. There was wood paneling on the walls, and interesting sort of like wrought iron plant holders that came out of it. And I saw two people walk by in the vision that they showed me, and then it came to an end, and I just kind of said like, well, thanks, but unlikely. And, like that's not likely. So I kept going, and of course, about a year later, I was on the phone with a monastery basically on the Oregon coast, and basically it was a phone interview to see if I should come for an in-person interview, to see if I was a good fit for it. And the last thing that the fellow told me was, oh, by the way, we're going to open up a cafe. We might need a dishwasher. And then I remembered that. And I didn't say anything because I thought, oh, I shouldn't tell them because they're going to think like I'm just saying that and I've got a big ego or something like that. So I was like, okay, yeah, And then I was like, well, that's probably I probably thought that every monastery has a mostly vegetarian cafe. So that's probably not like something significant, just a big coincidence. And it was about 16 months after having the vision to working there as an apprentice to the chef, chopping, I found myself looking out the ticket window, and the same head that crossed across in the Walmart vision was there, and with the wood paneling and the juice bar and the wrought iron plant, and I was like, oh, for God's sakes, here we are. So there's lots of that sort of stuff where that was just, I think, one of the louder examples, because it was me asking like, what the hell should I do in life, basically, where am I going to be, and there an answer was. That was the kind of the sight that was most common. Really wasn't into auras, and I didn't really want to be a medical intuitive and say, look out for your kidney, or something like that.
Mm. So what happened next?
What happened next? Well, before that I was 18, and I'd been doing all this concentration meditation, and Autobiography of a Yogi strolled into my life. And just reading that book, like happens to so many people, just it was just pouring love into me or pouring my heart open. And it was kind of a magical event to read that. And it also gave me a sense, okay, there's a different way for me to go. And then he got to this point where he says, anybody who prays to Babaji, he'll hear you. And I thought, like, well, I don't believe that. He's not going to hear me or something like that. But I did anyways. I said, okay, Babaji, if you're out there, I had been sending out for brochures to different monasteries, which they still had those in like 2000 or 2001. And many of them looked really nice. It didn't matter what denomination. I just wanted a place where I could meditate and work. and none of them had the right music about them. None of them had the right feel. So I was really confused what I should do next. And to my surprise, a message came through the top of my head. I was in meditation. I asked Babaji, and I felt as if it was like a ball of honey, come down into my crown. First, I was like, something trying to possess me, and I was like, "Now this feels very benign up there. This very, very benevolent. We don't worry about it." And then from that ball, there was a sort of a frequency that, like a pitch, that played in my head. And then basically, I was given a message: pay attention to this pitch, because the next time it plays, that'll be your clue to where you need to go. So I was like, okay. Babaji or whomever the hell you might be, I think you don't feel like a sketchy sort of astral being. I wasn't sure. I could tell I wasn't being possessed, so that was good. And I went forward, and it was a day or two later, I was coming home, and there was my sister and my brother-in-law, soon-to-be brother-in-law, on the stoop of our house, and that pitch started happening. I was like, okay, wow, there it was. And I was invited to go to a meditation course, the meditation that my soon-to-be brother-in-law had been practicing for a little bit. I hadn't really been interested to learn it because I felt I have my own stuff, and I don't want to be one of these people going about and uncommitted and distracting themselves. And before he could finish the invitation, I felt a yes coming out of my whole being, and then out my mouth, yes, let's go, which doesn't sound like unusual for a normal person, but at the time it wasn't so normal. I was very notorious for turning everything down in order to preserve my 6 hours of meditation. I had this almost like the world is against me sort of thing. I'm not going to let you, distract me from what I'm up to. So that yes was for me very like, whoa, okay. And so I went to this thing in Minneapolis, about 8 hours from our town. And I wasn't expecting much from it, honestly. When they explained the first meditation technique, like an English phrase using appreciation in it, I was like, this can't work. In my head, like Sanskrit is the language of spirituality. I had that in my mind at the time, and I did the damn thing, and I must have been 30 seconds. 40 seconds, even though it was a different meditate style than I was used to. I was used to trying to concentrate, and I'd gotten actually fairly good at that. And they were telling me, don't control the thoughts, let them, just let everything flow. I was like, oh, geez. And even though I was, mostly having thoughts of like, okay, now do this, they said to do this then, and et cetera, I suddenly realized that my arm was more relaxed than it had ever been. And I couldn't remember how long, and my whole body was relaxed. And as soon as I noticed that, I felt myself pulsed back into this sort of never-ending silence that was as deep or deeper than what I had experienced in the post-NDE life review. And oh my God, it kept going. I was still like, well, don't get your hopes up. This might be just some one-off experience here, but it just kept on. And through a whole weekend, and I was kind of like, okay, I think this is the thing I should be doing. So I asked the teachers, do you have a monastery? I can be ready in like 2 days. I can get over there. Like, I'm sorry, we just sold the monastery. It's like, oh shit, what bad luck. And then I found out that there were sort of different sort of small groups of people who were basically running little ashrams. And one was out in British Columbia, and another was in Idaho, later to move to Oregon. And I started pestering the group in the U.S. on the phone pretty quickly, and they were running interference, and I was like, okay, fine. And eventually I just thought I got to move to Seattle. We moved out there, and I thought I was going to be there for a little while, and I wasn't necessarily going to jump right into an ashram. But very quickly, less than a month into being in Seattle, I knew I had to go. I just knew. You're just wasting time here. You're marking time. This is what you need to do. So I, got that interview, and then I somehow passed, even though I was as nervous as I could ever recall being, and also had the sense that at least half or more of these people can see right through me. It was really uncomfortable to have all my insecurities. I felt people rummaging around my psychic closet, so I felt. And so somehow they were fine with sort of an anxious, self-conscious 18-year-old to join their fold. So I did, and I was overdoing it because I think I had some, I didn't know my position was secure. I always thought, oh, they're going to find out and they're just going to kick me out and I'll have to go back to Wisconsin or something like that. And it wasn't until I really did think I was the runt of the monastic litter. I thought all these people are much more still than me. I'm very bad at this. I'm probably going to quit. So then I went back after 3 months to just go to a wedding, my sister's wedding. And in the process of going there, I actually realized, oh my God, there's actually so much stillness in this experience. I just was not noticing it at all because I was constantly paying much more attention to my comparisons to all these other wonderful people. And I was like, okay, I guess we're not that bad. Self-diagnosis. And we went back, and it was a great 6.5 year run, both on the Oregon coast and in sub-centers in Michigan and Helsinki and Switzerland and Hong Kong, and it was like Shangri-La for me.
Which organization is this?
Well, it's one that now is called the Ishaya Foundation. When I was with them, it was called the Ishaya Tradition. It's associated with this meditation practice, often called the Ishaya's Ascension. So that was mine was a very little organization. I think we were mostly awful at marketing, and a little bit, I think we did have, a lot of us had like monastic sticks up our asses, way too tight, and I think for 5.5 of the 6.5 years, it was like the perfect place for me. And truth be told, I think they actually were very conscientious and were actually passing down as little of sort of the kind of cultish BS that they could have. I did feel kind of protected by grace, but I came back to the main center after having spent a long time helping to sort of run small meditation centers and being a little bit older and being freer. And I was in Michigan, and I was starting to have these experiences where I was melting into the silence everywhere, and I was needing only 3 hours of sleep at night, and I was feeling just sort of bliss flowing through me. And I was having a wonderful time, and I was on one of these late night walks I used to go on. And from my heart, the same voice that had really been there in all the big life decisions, it said, you should get yourself fired. You should get yourself kicked out. I was like, no. When things are going so well, we can't, this is bad timing. He's like, no, you should. And I knew why. I kind of knew why that voice was saying that, because I could feel it in my body. When it was saying that, it was highlighting this strand of fear that I had, and a certain strand where I was getting my security I was getting a false security from affiliation with teachers and organization, and it was basically telling me, you don't need that. You need to get rid of that, and a good way to get rid of that would be to, get yourself kicked out. And I just basically sent the message back like, God. Would have sometimes like, oh, that was, I wasn't hearing that right, And so the next year from that point basically looked like, kind of, the magic and synchronicity that had been I think the hallmarks of the last few years were just like being cut off. And so I wasn't putting two and two together. Probably I could have a little bit more easily if there had been a good off-ramp for people to go and leave the organization, but there wasn't, which is endemic to a lot of these things, is they keep people too long and they treat people who leave like second-class outsiders, and so I wasn't keen on that. And I also internally was like, I'm going to be committed until I'm 80, or however long I live. So I was quite resistant for a number of reasons to actually following that. But then at some point I made a promise to myself that if I ever find myself as a malcontent in this thing, if I ever find that I'm in constant argument and joyless and have no sense of positive connection for a prolonged period of time. I didn't define it, but that would be my signal that it's time for me to go. And so one day I just kind of noted that, oh, I think that's where I am. So kind of the promise was activated, and I just made the decision. And I started telling people, like, I realize I have to go. And that was, as soon as I made that decision, the magic and the synchronicity just kind of came back, and that was wonderful to do that. Unfortunately, that didn't last. I had a period of about 6 years after that where I don't like to overuse the word dark night of the soul. I don't want to change the definition of the term so much, but that was probably as close as I'd get to that sort of thing in the life. Is I was also like so many people who leave kind of like culty organizations, kind of became an outsider, sort of a persona non grata. It's sort of had the sense of losing the spiritual family.
They didn't take it well when you wanted to leave.
At first I think they took it really well and were very supportive and weren't treating me like shit. But I think at one point I might have made a criticism or a critique, and the first thing I get from, hey, I hear you're talking shit about us. It's like, one, I wasn't I wouldn't say I'm talking shit. I was making a very diplomatic, measured critique, and it was kind of at that point, and they were discouraging me from being a meditation teacher, even though at that point I would say I was good as anybody, if not better than many of my peers. I just happened to be living outside of the organization, not in physical proximity. And so a number of those things and a number of things that I had been railing at while within the organization, just I was seeing, I think, a bit more clearly, or certainly from a different point of view. And that hurt. It hurt. And but what hurt more was I did kind of repress myself. And I also still had some questions. I was wondering if to what degree had all those experiences that I'd had, to what degree were they really, really true? Was I in some way fooling myself? Was I, and I'm actually thankful that I did an experiment where I just stopped all practice. And I didn't go boozing or all these other things. I didn't have those kind of wild oats. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Everyone maybe should go a little bit IQ if they need to. My wild oats were like going to university, which is bizarre. And so, I cut myself off, and then, after about 3 years or so, I got to experience suffering again. Like really good, old-fashioned existential suffering like I remembered from being a depressed teenager. And it had been a while, and it was actually wonderful for me to get that contrast. And for me to go, I really was using my nervous system in a different way. It wasn't just me doing make-believe or something like that. There was really some kind of fundamental shift was achieved and was possible. Oh, okay, this is good to know. And I got to be at age 29, so that means I was about 4 years out of the monastery, and I was in my astrological Saturn return, and one morning, early morning, I woke up unable to breathe. I couldn't get a breath in. I found myself shot out of my body. I was in the middle of my bedroom with my body behind me. There was a door with light behind it in front of me. I had an instinct that this was the door to the other side, so if I wanted to go, I could go. So I started walking towards it because I was just intrigued, not like I was necessarily making that choice yet. And then a voice kind of came in from somewhere else and said, like, you could totally walk out that door right now. You could go, and you would be, you'd be all right. They're basically saying that karma would be neutral. It wouldn't be a big deal. Or you can walk back into your body because there's a lot more, dharmic work that you can do. And I obviously took the or. It was very persuasive. Turned around, went back in, suddenly was able to breathe again. And then as soon as I made that choice, when it gave me that, it was a real choice, something shifted. just back, like that had been out of whack for 2 to 4 years, and the old magic started to come back. I still had to practically graduate from university and take care of a bunch of other things that I wasn't maybe as interested in anymore, but I did that, and then I basically came back to meditation practice and teaching, and it was a very, very accelerated next few years of having everything sort of deepen in a way that I was glad that I suffered, because it's like I would find myself as a 23-year-old meditation teacher. Sometimes I would have this sort of us versus them kind of mentality, like sort of an insularity in the monastic setting. And I instinctively knew that was not a very good thing at all. And so when I would find myself maybe even speaking from that, like influenced by that, I'd want to like go home and like take a Scotch-Brite shower. Like, oh yeah, why are you doing that? That's dirty. But I couldn't shake it. I couldn't quite shake that judgmentalness fully. Like I could see it, I knew I didn't want it, but it was sticky. And so I think I needed to go out and fuck up in all the ways that I thought people were fucking up in the square world. And by doing so, I was like, oh, shit, I guess I'm one of those fuck ups too. And when I came back to teaching meditation, God, it was just so much easier. And I think it was so much more effective because there was this little like barrier that had been there that just wasn't there anymore. And call it compassion, call it just a deeper level of non-judgment, whatever I call it. It was wonderful to be free of that. I probably could have had that without being a suffering philosophy major in Portland, Oregon, for 5 years. But I guess we take the turns we need to in the end. And so that was. Coming back was wonderful, and I actually maybe 2 days after that event of not being able to breathe, I meet the woman who ends up being my wife, and when I am introduced to her, it's just like, kind of like again, the hair is a sense of presence, a sense of light, almost like inner lightning is there, but I could very clearly see oh no. It's kind of an oh yes and an oh no, because I was like, oh, you're going to give me a relationship, are you? Because I never thought of myself as necessarily the marrying type, or that sort of thing. But that became very clear that was part of somebody's plan, and I'm so glad that I didn't resist that, because she has been a huge part of I think walking maybe a more holistic or a fuller or sensitive path, and always she has had a sense of what the hell I was going to do next before I had the sense, which that was always find is very interesting, and so that became part of it. I didn't want to be a householder. I wanted to be a strange bearded man living in the mountains of like southern China. That's where I thought I was going to end up, realistically, a mountain man in China, but we didn't go that way. And I'm kind of going through my whole life here, Steve. So where next? I did have an awful year in 2016, which I was glad to have. Won't necessarily go into all the details of it because it's not just me involved in that, but it was a year in which everything that could go wrong was going wrong, and so like day after day I would almost feel like viscerally like I was getting pooped on by the universe, and it was so heavy there was no place for me to escape, and I'd always been able to escape into joy previously, and so I think this it got so heavy that it was both comical, and it seemed like this is probably really good for me, even though I absolutely hate almost every moment I'm living through right now, because it forced me to accept things as they are in a way that my crutches, my joy crutch of all the years that I'd been alive would have precluded me from doing. And so as soon as that period kind of came to a close, I started basically having these experiences of being sort of fully merged in everything, and having this strange but not so weird, non-local experience. So instead of having a sort of consciousness primarily based in head or heart or body, there was a sense of a multi-bodied life that was going on, and I found, oh, that's very, very nice, that's very interesting that this is happening, and I had this open question for years of why the hell am I living in Portland, Oregon? It's a wonderful place, and no one who lives there really would ask that because they think, oh, we live in the best city, on earth, and I could do. But it was strange. I thought it was strange for me to be there, and it was an open question. And in that year, then that question started to be answered, in a sort of experiential way. So, for instance, I used to take this turn on my way to work, and every time I would make the turn in that year, I would see a certain view, and it would start making me cry. And usually I was holding it together because I wanted to be a good driver and not make an accident. And so one time I said, like, okay, the next time if that happens and there's no other cars around, just let yourself go fully into this emotion and see what's there. You'll be able to, be a good driver. So next time came, there were no cars. I let the thing come, and some word, Luca or Lucha, came up. And I was like, okay, what's that? So I looked it up online. I saw there was a city in Tuscany of that name, and the first on the Wikipedia page, the first picture of it, it was the damnedest thing. There was a view of like the city in a valley with hills in the distance, which had an eerily similar profile to the hills of West Portland on that view. And I was like, oh, good Lord, that's so strange. This started to pile on. I would be walking around my neighborhood, which was the Mississippi neighborhood of Portland. All the Portlanders watching, there's a bit of a shout out to one of our finer neighborhoods. And instead of just being in 2017, it was as if somebody was pulling like this weird transparent film down over it, again in a strangely non-confusing way. And I was in I kept thinking 3rd century BC Rome. And so a lot of the people, I could see what they were wearing today, but then they would have different clothes on. We would be talking in English, I'd be hearing Latin and other things, I mean, like Greek too, I think. And it wasn't that was interesting. What was somehow powerful about it was at the emotional level. I felt when I was having interactions with people from the space as if somehow by being open with them and being present and being still, I could feel these things popping off of me and falling off of me and popping off of them. And it was as if we were all together in the same city at the same time and sandwiched realities, I don't know, bringing closure to something. That was the best words I could use for it. But for me recognizing this, there was this immense sense of just peace, completion, and bliss. They added a third level. I know I was in 15th century Tuscany. So sometimes I'd be in 3 places. It seemed like I was in 3 places at once. And some people were in only 2 of them. Some people were in 1, and some people were in 3 with me. And I realized why I knew some people. Like I had this sense of why I knew one of my best. I was working often as a sort of a permaculture informed gardener. I called it. I was a fancy gardener. And I had a client who I loved, and he loved me, and seemed to be looking for excuses to give me more garden projects, basically. And being with him and being with my mentor, a great builder who I just had strange instant rapport with in this life. I found myself in the same space with them. All of a sudden, we're Roman soldiers, and we're in armor, and we're talking, about, battle plans, and then we switch back, and we're having a conversation of what to do with a certain wall, and even though the subject matter was completely different, there was a sense, oh no, this is the same thing. There's something that's just completely the same about this. So those were sort of little side things that were kind of taking place while this, I call it a shift into unity consciousness was happening. I was having this sense of just all these reconciliations just piling on, like a sense of oh, I'm done with that, and it's wonderful, and now it's a clear thing. I had the feeling of being like somebody on a farewell tour of their favorite spots. Like, who knows, they're on a farewell tour in some way. So that was really interesting. And then I, in about 2019, I had this. It was a great year for me to be in Portland. I had this sense as I would walk down the street, I'd say, the sentence was, is this what an intuitive in Pompeii in 78 AD would feel? And I didn't even have the feeling yet, but that sentence would come in repeatedly. And I was like, okay, well, what am I feeling? It's like, impending doom, something like that. And so I had the very clear sensation like, oh, I need to get out of Dodge in 2019. I need to leave the United States. And I had no really reason to, because I was having a really good life there. But I was very set, like, nope, this is a psychic in Pompeii, and I'm going to, listen to the urgings to get out. And so my wife's was finishing up a job in Japan, and I felt like I was somehow finishing something up in Portland, and we decided, okay, let's go to Europe, and we ended up in moving to Portugal in November of 2019 or so, and renting a house in December out in the countryside, thinking we're not going to spend much time here. We're going to be, busy traveling around in 2020 teaching meditation classes, and that ended up turning out to be a very, very, very good place to kind of, wait out the COVID pandemic. It was, there were more sheep than people around, and it was fresh air, and we had garden space and cheap rent, and all those things. It didn't have to be sort of boxed in and locked in and any of that. So that was yeah. I think I've sort of skipped things. I sometimes forget half of my life until it comes up in conversation. And let's see, what else? Where do you want to go?
I noticed that when you tell your life story, you say I did
Yes.
this, I did that. But then when you are reflecting on your sort of psychic promptings, you often say we don't need this,
Oh, that's interesting.
that, etc. Is there something behind that?
I'm not sure, because I'm not. That's very interesting. I don't think I've ever noticed that. That's something that passes by my notice. That's interesting. I have to catch one of those the next time. I think sometimes it may be due. I'm not sure about this, but it may be due to a certain sense of in certain spaces. I basically feel as if, not going to say like I turns into a we, but I becomes multifocal in a way, and that's a possibility. But honestly, I don't know. Yeah, don't know.
I'm also curious what you were doing in your 6 hours of meditation.
Okay, well, let's see. Must have been usually like an hour, if not more. I think I doubled up sometimes morning and afternoon. I would do the breath counting 1 to 10. That would take some time. I would also do about an hour of straight up breathing meditation, where I would just be following the breath. Then I would also kind of be, that sort of morphed into a body scanning kind of practice. I'd be going through, the whole body. That I did certain kinds of, I could call them translated meta practices, because they may not be so proper, things I was taught. And I would do these kind of loving kindness practices that felt very genuine and very, very good, where I would just allow myself to reach out to anybody and everybody, whether they're specific people or groups of people. I kind of let that be organic, and so I would send love out and do that for a while. I would also do these. I'm glad I don't do them anymore. A lot of this, I would do this sort of chakra-based practice, and I would kind of do that with the breathing, and I would focus in each one in sort of sequence and go. And then I would do these microcosmic breathing practices, which I found that was more effective and more interesting in sort of my cobbled together teen monk practice where I would, basically I'd also be doing the so-hum practice. So, hub, hum, so, and or sao hong if we want to do the, NG pronunciation. So that was basically the rounds. Oh no, there was more. I used to lay on the ground, and I would lay flat on the ground, and I would find myself doing almost like a microcosmic breathing practice, but with the core of the planet and the sky up there, and I would kind of go down, and that actually brought quite a few interesting mystical experiences my way. The spookiest practice, though it wasn't meant to be spooky, as I would at night sit in my darkened room, and there would be a mirror in front of me, and I would light a candle in front of the mirror, and I would look into the left eye of my reflection, which is my right eye, and when I would do that, I would be vocally chanting either Om or the Tetragrammaton, Yad He Vav He. And that was an interesting thing to do. I would do that for about 30 minutes every night. And so that was an unusual sort of practice. And I think that kind of rounds out. I was doing some mantra work, but I was forcing it. I was glad to later discover effortless mantra practice. I was too tight on, say, like Om Namah Shivaya, and doing almost like machine gunning it a bit too much. So but I still got good effects out of that. So yeah, those were the teen monk years, and I would do hatha yoga or a tai chi practice in the morning after the cold shower.
Why do you say that you don't do the chakra meditation anymore with such relief?
Oh, I could extend that to a bunch of the other ones. I think I was spinning my wheels a little bit. I think it wasn't really doing what other practices, which I later learned could do for me, without me trying to have it happen. I think sometimes I was just trying to force something to happen, and like trying to hammer a screw into a wall. So that one always felt like a chore for me, for the most part, where some of the others would more naturalistically turn into some interesting experiences. But actually it was another Scorpio out there. I remember hearing Adyashanti's account of doing concentration meditation sort of in a hardcore athlete kind of style, only to have sort of relief and silence come when he exhausts himself. And that was basically what was often going on with me, as I would be just going at it, not having a great time, and then all of a sudden, just everything breaks and relaxes, like, oh my God, this is great, and then I would, go to bed not long after that. Yeah.
Were psychedelics ever a part of your exploration?
No, and not less. I didn't really have anything against them. I had a weird sort of puritanical streak from childhood where I was hesitant to even take aspirin. I don't know where that came from. It's like I was obsessed with mind over matter type stuff. I wanted to keep the experiment pure or something like that. I think marijuana went psychedelic with me, which was bizarre. I was smoking out of the same pipe as a bunch of other people. And then I described my experience. I said, I went outside and everything was made out of geometry and light, and I was talking to the trees, and the lake spirits came out, and it was very that was kind of trippy. I don't know if the marijuana was laced with anything. I don't think it was, because nobody else seemed to be having that experience so much. But I basically stayed away, and I kind of felt like I had enough unusual stuff going on anyways that at the time I wasn't really drawn, and in my circles, or the healing effects of psychedelics weren't played up so much. If they had been, I think I would have been a bit more interested and drawn to go there, but that wasn't just part of the conversation to that point in life. Later, after I'd done like years of meditation practice, I did mushrooms, very gentle psychedelic. I did a very low dose for my body weight. It must have been like 1.25 or 1.5 dry grams, just being very conservative for for the first, and that was, good Lord, that might as well have maybe functioned as a heroic dose, because that was taking me to near Bija Samadhi, and actually had an effect that I had not heard of at that point. At that time I had this awful back injury, and it was kind of debilitating. I'd get up from a desk, or get up from my desk in university, and I'd have to very painfully straighten myself out. And this 1.25 or 1.5 grams of mushrooms, pain has never come back. It's been 10 years or something since that. And my wife and I were doing this together in her dorm room at her college, and we were having telepathic conversations, and then we were validating what we were talking about mentally by sometimes going into verbal to say, like, hey, is that what have we been thinking? And then you know, which was kind of also fun, and we were having the experience of being one being, and you know, living in all these different bodies at the same time, and yeah, it's lovely.
I think I have two more questions. The first is about your mother.
Yeah.
Losing one's mother at any age, very sad indeed.
Yeah.
At 13, perhaps.
Oh God.
Deeply sad.
Yeah.
Was this a wound that you worked with in any sense, or came up in any way over the rest of your life with all these practices you were doing, and if so, how?
Oh yeah, God, absolutely. How? I mean, how do you avoid it? I mean, it's just so. It's just in your face and ever present. That heavy grief, that sense of absence, and especially in my case, I had a very good relationship with my mother, and she was somebody who I, even beyond mother-son, had a spiritual connection with, had a genuine rapport with. So it was very hard to, even more difficult to lose her. One, doing an effortless meditation practice that worked allowed me to actually grieve in a way that I think a lot of people in my environment repressed. And so, you know, there would just be waterworks days of just crying, and having it move out, and having the anger come out. That was there, and being very lucky to have people in a community who could be very presence-filled witnesses and kind of allow me to have that kind of space was just a great boon. Next, I remember, this is more of an effect, not so much a work. A lot of the therapeutic work, I think, was just happening as a fascinating byproduct of me doing the meditation practice and allowing the emotions to flow. And so I was maybe midway through a 6-month intensive meditation retreat. We might meditating like 12 to 16 hours a day with the eyes closed, and I got up to go to the bathroom, get a drink of water. I look up into the mirror, and in a non-spooky way, there's my mother's face and mine, and not necessarily due to biological similarities, but you know, actually kind of her face, and there was just a total sense of reconnection. Like, and I guess I put it in the way that my mother and I are, you know, we're two different beings, but one being at the same time, just like kind of we all are. I experienced it specifically with her, as if our life streams were somehow back to the point where they're joined and differentiate into different souls, and in that it was that must not have lasted more than 15 seconds tops. I think that being in that space, but it felt like days of sort of unwound material in that one moment. I didn't do anything. I just looked up into a mirror, and everything just sort of happened out of the silence. But that changed things to where before that there was a real like wondering in a very human way, like would my mother be proud of what I'm up to? You know, those sorts of questions. And there was just an absolute sense of she's been here the whole time, and this is exactly what we needed to be doing. And like a lot of those loose ends were just sort of sorted out right there. that wasn't by any means the end of the grief, because I think that we're like kind of like onions or Russian dolls, and that we have these layers that we're not necessarily going to touch all at the same time. But that was a significant moment. Certainly more of that came out. In fact, I probably had to do more psychological work with my own inner child necessarily than with my mother. It's like I had to go and talk to this 13-year-old boy who was sort of frozen, frozen in a moment that they couldn't handle. And that was something that actually frustrated me, because I could still sort of feel that there when I was experiencing these maybe very interesting or elevated states of consciousness. I could still but there's an area of arrested development. I'm feeling it. There's a little boy. I still go and talk to him, because I still feel areas of sort of frozen grief, and in a very visceral sort of way in the body. So I go and sort of bring that in, bring him into presence, bring him into love, bring those bits. So that has been a bit of work over the last 27 years now. Yeah, for sure. Mom showed up. I was actually frustrated. I was like, God damn it! I grew up seeing all these bloody ghosts, and where the hell's my mom? That's the ghost I want to see. Was not coming around. I kind of got the memo from those spirit guides that probably that includes my mom too. Okay, somehow I just put that together and said it's fine that she's not visited me. It's probably necessary. So years later, even after that experience in the mirror, I was on my honeymoon, and I happened to be in a city that, Florence, Italy, that my mother was wholly enamored with. And growing up, she was actually saying when you get to high school, she never made it that far, of course. After you graduate high school, we're going to take a trip to Florence together. And so when I forgot about that until I was walking up Giotto's tower by the Duomo in Florence, and I suddenly realized, they're very narrow steps. It's like, my goodness, I have to be by chance stepping on some of the same spots that my mother so loved when she was at a much younger age. And I came up to one of these window stopping points. You can look out over over Florence and the hills, and I smelled her perfume. There was nobody around me. There was no perfume. And I had, before that, of course, I'd forgotten what her perfume smelled like. But in that moment, I was like, oh, I was back in childhood. Smelled her perfume, and I felt someone wrapping me from behind, and just went into tears and joy, because the hands were touching my heart, and so I had a couple moments like that where, after the fact, a more personal sort of that was extremely healing as well, both to the little boy who was lost in grief.
On the one hand, you teach meditation these days, and I'm curious what you teach. Is it what you learned in that group? Or is it an evolution of that? Is it something different? That's the first part. Second part is, where are you at in your own being in terms of, you talked about this arising of a different sort of consciousness that was happening. Yeah. I'm wondering where that's at. And what about the psychic elements? Are those in a phase of being alive and active, or are they in a more dormant phase? So these are two questions, one to do with your activity and the one to do with your being.
Right. Well, the easy part, activity first. I basically teach the same meditation that I was taught in January 2002, so the one that I was practicing in that ashram group. I haven't really changed it or tweaked it at all. So I teach that, but I also teach effortless bija mantra practices, which I came to love as well, and so those are the things that I enjoy teaching the most, and I think I'm probably the most effective at. So there's that. Now, in my own consciousness, I sort of stopped chasing the carrot so much at one point. I was definitely a huge carrot chaser, so it's like, we got to get into this state of consciousness. So I was looking for all the things, but at about 2017, before that, I'd had I would have these phases where I would have this very non-local flavor, which was a delight to live in, and have this sense of sort of having the world be my body, which was very enjoyable, and that would kind of come and go. Well, that still comes and goes. It's more coming than going these days than it was some time back, and so that's kind of where things are with that. And then there's other stranger experiences where it's kind of I don't even quite know how to language it. Like one time I thought, am I having a stroke? Because it was a weird thing. I felt as if everything was turning into, even with the eyes open, into some complete nothingness in a way that it never quite before. And so I went into the hospital to take all these tests. And I was like, "Are you sure there's nothing wrong with my heart or my brain?" And they're like, "We're pretty damn sure." It's like, okay, well, all right. And so that kind of persisted, and that was very interesting. I almost felt like as if there was this great eraser devourer that was just eating everything up. And so life for a while, I'm still in this phase where things go between having this sense of, when I say things disappearing, I don't mean I'm going blind or I can't hear anything. There's still sensory information happening, but there's it's as if I'm tuning into this kind of like there's a black hole behind everything. It's hard for me to put language, and then that switches into there's an infinite a million watt light bulb, in everything, and sometimes they're both there at the same time in a weird way. So that I don't know what practical use that is to any human being to have such experiences, but if I was thinking practically, it makes suffering very difficult to arise. It's very difficult to be caught in kind of small as self existential dilemmas when those things are going on. Because I have to say, both that light, both the black hole and everything, and the infinite light and everything, are manifestations of the great mystery, the unbounded, the thing that we can't really name, that we experience in samadhi. So that's what's going on there. The psychic stuff seems to, I kind of always had a sense that I shouldn't try to develop that as a thing unto itself very early on. I would focus more on finding silence, maintaining silence, kind of, to me that was the bullseye, and I would let the peripheral things kind of come as they like, and the psychic stuff was always peripheral in my book. So that comes and goes as it pleases, as it likes. A lot of life will be, I don't know, as 3D normal as it could get. Then all of a sudden I'll walk into a space and I'll see there's a ghost, or I'll be with somebody and words will come out because I'm seeing pictures around their head. And I said, like, well, okay, take this with a grain of salt, but I'm going to tell you, that sort of thing. I do work as an intuitive astrologer as well, so that kind of keeps me in that space to a certain degree. That work is mostly around tuning into people's purpose, I'd have to say, so that doesn't necessarily have to come with psychic stuff, but often when I'm with people or before I'm with people and I'm preparing their chart, I will get very vivid imagery that I will write down if it's persistent. And early on in that sort of practice, I decided I would share this stuff in case it was useful, and that often ends up being the most useful to the client's part of the situation. But I just sort of let it arise as it wants to, and not stress about it too much.
A copper beach. Yeah. So, is there anything else that you'd like to say? Anything else that we should say as we finish up this discussion, Ishtar?
Yeah, I think so. Probably would be that life is bliss. That's what I usually say, actually. I'm not sure that's the most important thing to say right now with you. No, yeah. That would be it. It sounds like a trope, but basically the thing that has been behind this life, whether it was in the wonderful monastic environment or the NDE or the childhood world of, mix of ego and mystical experiences, or the more productive years afterwards, is there's this background light of bliss that's pulsing through everything. And life's a ride. My life, your life, many people out there, their lives might be different, have a different shape than mine. It might be important for them to have a sense of, I've got this big mission, I'm gonna achieve that. And I think that was important in mine too at a certain point. But at the same time, this life it's for fun. There's a joy in waking up, if that's your calling. That the process itself is valuable. The stumbles, the idiotic mistakes, the cul-de-sacs, every little bit of everything. There's this aspect of being, or the divine, that is laughing in the most mirthful sort of way. That it's there. Now, of course, saying that, and that's having the realization of that, or having experiences of that, obviously very different than just being caught up in suffering. So if you have it in you, if you feel the call of the mountains, metaphorical call of the mountains, follow it like crazy. Go for it. Because there's something powerful about putting your whole heart, mind, body, and soul to one purpose for a prolonged period of time, and just going for it 100%. It's worth it. And you will have no regret if you can live as if, when you're on your deathbed, or your death ground, or your death car seat, or wherever you meet your end, if you can be at that moment and not have that regret of, I should have gave it my all in that spot, or this spot, or this spot, whatever that happens to be, that's a life worth living, when you don't have to have that regret. So just go for it. And maybe get off the internet a bit more too, except for Steve's videos. Get off and practice, and maybe don't spend so much time in pedantic conversations with people online where you're not really even communicating with anybody, and go meditate for 4 freaking hours at a time, and do something that pushes you in that way, and do it again the next day, and again the next day, and the next day, and go for it, and don't shit or get off the pot. As a construction worker once told me when I was asking for life advice about, should I go to the Himalayas? And they said, well, shit or get off the pot. I was like, God damn, that's wise. That's right. So just do it, and yeah.
Ishtar, thank you very much.
Yeah. There we go.
There we go.
I bought this stick yesterday from a man claiming to be perhaps the oldest stick peddler in the United Kingdom.
Stick peddler.
I didn't know stick peddlers existed, but that's right, yeah. His name is Christian Wood. Fitting name for somebody selling sticks.
Thank you for listening to another Guru Viking podcast. For more interviews like these, as well as articles, videos, and guided meditations, visit www.guruviking.com.